Hey, thanks everyone. This is Nick Jain, the CEO of IdeaScale, bringing you another episode of Chief Innovation Officer Fireside Chats. Today, our guest is Michael Baskin, the Chief Innovation Officer from Montgomery County in Maryland, focused on creating a just, human-centered government. He's led innovation efforts in cities across the country and helped them thrive through initiatives such as the 2020 Census and Outcomes-Based Budgeting. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Nick. Glad to be here. Glad to chat.
Perfect. So I'll jump right into the hard question right away. So what does innovation actually mean in the context of municipal and local governments? And said another way, what do you actually do?
Yeah, maybe those are two different questions, but we like to take that it's a hard question that many folks spend a lot of time trying to answer. What is innovation in local government? We try to make it really simple. It's making things better. It then does get more complex from there, like for whom, defined by whom. When we started off in Montgomery County, we said we wanted to make things more efficient, more effective, and more equitable. And we've shifted to building towards a government that is just and liberating and human. But when we talk about innovation, we try to lower the bar so that we can build that staircase to big change. It's part of our mantra of starting small and scaling. And we are based on the belief that people who are in processes and in systems are the best people to improve those processes and improve those systems. And so if they're improving that process, if they're improving that system, we're going to call that innovation. We're going to celebrate that. We're going to support that.
Got it. One just technical question. What did you mean by lowering the bar? I didn't understand the phrase in this context.
I think that often people think that innovation is set for small teams who work with a specialized skill set, and that's not for me. And a big piece of what we're trying to do is make sure that for our example, our 9,000 person workforce, that all of them are seeing themselves as innovators. And so we want to remove those barriers to people stepping into their role as innovators.
Got it.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I think about a fair amount, there was a cool platform that came out that allowed you sort of to have these meetings. This was in the midst of the pandemic, where rather than getting put into a breakout room, you had a little avatar and you could jump around and move lots of rooms. And we were using it to use a bunch of sort of liberating structures to help people connect and unleash their creativity and potential with each other. And at the end of everything, one of our innovation tools is a simple plus delta, plus things we want to grow and delta things you might want to change. And so we asked folks, what might you want to grow and change? And one participant said, that was awesome, that was great, but I really wish I could have moved from one breakout room to another. And a light bulb went off because, of course, they could do that at any time. They were free to go and do it, but they'd been so locked up in these worlds that say you get moved from room to room and who you talk to is controlled by others, that they hadn't even tapped on that door and realized that it was unlocked and open all along. And so often we see that sort of same experience playing out with local government bureaucrats who are trying to make things better, where they think that they're locked up in these things because they've been told over and over again by, our systems and our policies are sending messages. And the messages that too often we're sending to our local government colleagues is we don't trust you, don't innovate. And so one way to think about that lowering the bar is we want to lower that bar so that people recognize and can step into the freedom that they have to make things better for themselves, their colleagues, and the people we serve.
It's funny that sentiments you express that, they've been told a certain way. Both my parents were civil servants up in Canada their entire life. And that was one of my mother just retired from federal civil service a couple of months ago. And that was her constant complaint that I want to make changes, but there's all these processes or it's just, somebody saying no, right?
Yeah. And it's sometimes that messaging is explicit, right? Someone says, nope, don't try something new. We've already tried that. And sometimes it's really insidious and it's more implicit. It's built into the policies that we put out that say, don't try anything or only use this tool or this system. And a lot of those things are put in place for really good reasons. But I think the end result is that we begin to lose the muscles that it takes to create change. And then every once in a while, a new administration comes in, we say, go create change, go innovate. And people step out, but those muscles are weak. And so they stumble and they fall. And they go, well, look at that. Guess those people can't innovate. And we stick them back in the cells. And the question is I think for innovation teams and part of the role that I see, it's to help create that space for people to build those muscles of innovation so that we can have a workforce of 9,000 innovators. Yeah.
So one related concept to that, I was trained as a scientist, and all of science is about experimentation, knowing that like 95% of experiments fail. And
Yeah.
innovation structurally is that way, right? Like most things people are going to try are going to fail, and that should be okay. And you don't just shut down your innovation efforts, your desire to get better, because 95% of things fail. If you know that ex ante and are emotionally comfortable with it, both as a leader as well as an organization.
Yeah.
Science would suffer a lot if we, started firing scientists every time their experiments fail.
Totally. And like, how do we help bureaucrats? Like all of us, use that composition notebook. Like many of us had those science classes. And so how do we tap people back into their, we talk a lot in the play and the child side, but also into that, hey, I used to be a scientist at a science fair side of that allows people to say, you know what, failure in trying things, I'm testing a hypothesis. And then how do we equip folks to go to their managers and go to their colleagues and go to residents and say, hey, I'm not pushing this out at you all the way. I got this idea and I've got this assumption. The only way for me to test this assumption is to try it out. Would it be cool if we try this for a month? And if it doesn't work, we'll go right back to the way it does. And it's by saying, hey, we're going to create this space for failure. Like, how do we give people that course, that structured course that allows them to create that space to communicate that and then to fail over and over again, knowing that's part of their journey towards something better.
Yeah, no, that's in fact, like there's a ton of academic research on this. That's the better way to run an organization, both in the private and public sector, where, low cost experimentation, where the cost of failure is both low for the individual as well as for the organization. And then the benefit is obviously when things work, you go do a lot more of it.
Yeah. I mean, you think like IdeaScale, which is in some ways like, hey, this idea of a suggestion box is outdated. And then it's a black box that goes there and never comes out, right? Unless the airplane crashes. But the IdeaScale says, let's put all these ideas out so that we can all look at them. And what we're doing in Montgomery County is saying, put all these ideas out. And then let's make sure that you all have the power to rapidly test and iterate and prototype with those ideas and learn from that and create that learning organization across the space. I think it's really, really exciting to watch all of these ideas in actions where people get, they don't say, well, I submitted an idea, not my responsibility anymore. And you go back 10 years later, like, well, I submitted something. And you hear this all the time. I submitted an idea once and nothing ever did with it. It's not my responsibility. This means we can't make a change. Versus I took an idea, I owned this idea. And with the support of the organization, with the celebration of that type of success, we're going to move things forward.
Got it. I want to jump ahead to kind of some of what you laid out. You said two or for whom, I think were the words you said earlier in this call.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that these initiatives are actually benefiting all residents, especially, the underserved communities? Montgomery County is a pretty, diverse diverse in many ways. How do you help make sure that everything you're doing actually helps the broader community, particularly those who are, less privileged or underserved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we really work with people and innovators in our government on is asking that the sort of two fundamental questions. One is who benefits, right? From that third phase of power, who benefits? And we look at that question by, things like when we map out a process or a service, we identify inequity as one of the forms of waste. So, we have non-utilized talent and waiting and over-processing, all those standard ones. And we say, where are people going to be dropping out based on some part or characteristic of themselves, especially race, that they can't change? So we look at that as sort of one way and one perspective. And the other thing that we do is we say, how do we make sure, and this part of sort of our core mission in the innovation team, that those most impacted by the problem actively shape the solution? And then to take it one step further, that those who are most deeply impacted are also shaping the definition of the problem in the first place. And we try to go from designing for, right, to taking a bunch of the tools, these human-centered design tools that come from the private sector that often are imbued with those private sector values, and adopting them, not just adopting them, but adapting them to public sector values, and saying, as an innovation team, we're going to hold space, not to design for you, but to create space for you to design on your own, and make sure that those, especially from communities that have traditionally have power taken away from them, that they are made as sort of the leaders of the change that they're going to create, and make sure they're having sort of real voice and agency, but also that their hands are involved in shaping the definition of the problem and the solutions that emerge. But it's a big challenge, and I think it's one where we could continue to grow and learn.
The example I always think of, when it talks about who is it helping. So, I live in Philadelphia. Over the past 5 or 10 years, they've added a bunch more digital municipal services, right? You can file for licenses and stuff online, which wasn't possible 10 years ago. And I think it actually disproportionately benefits underserved communities, because I can take an hour off in the middle of my workday to go sit in a line somewhere.
Yeah.
Many people don't have that fortune, that flexibility to. And
Yeah.
so that investment in technology, it helps me, but who did it disproportionately affect or benefit? Like folks who don't have that luxury in life, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky to have a lot of really great partners in this. One is, if your life matters, then your time matters. And we look at that time tax and that time burden that we put on, along with all of the stigmas for applying for benefits and accessing so many government services. And there's some really wonderful partners at the Beck Center at Georgetown, their digital benefits network. There's some great folks in Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania. But we all, in local government, get to learn from each other. And then we see the mistakes that other people make. And that's a really great benefit that we have to say, we keep messing things up in government. And hopefully we can sort of build on that to get better.
That's true in the private sector too. So, okay. So next question is kind of a broad one. What role does data play in making Montgomery County more efficient and responsive to your residents' needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're lucky to have a really strong county stat, which is like a city stat team here. And that's traditionally been in a very sort of performance management system. We also use outcomes-based budgeting in Montgomery County. So how do we make sure that every single budget dollar is tied to a specific outcome? And that way we're sort of embedding evidence-based practice and evaluation along the way. And those are sort of like your standard pieces. There's great allies like Bloomberg Philanthropies What Works Cities initiative, which has helped cities around the country to sort of embed that evidence-based practices into their organizations, and Johns Hopkins Government Center for Government Excellence. But one of the ways that we're trying to really do it here, to go beyond that, is to begin to incorporate that qualitative data back in and say, hey, when we're using data to make services more effective and more responsive to citizen needs, we're not just looking at the quantitative metrics, but also looking at the qualitative metrics. And then rather than just to have this sitting in one sort of stat or data analytics team, how do we equip, when we're equipping people with the tools to innovate, one of the key skills that we equip them with is how to measure their success and know, am I on track or not to be successful, which is sort of the core of any of these data questions. And sometimes that means learning to crawl before they learn to run. So, it's sometimes getting really basic of like, what's the widget that you're actually creating? What's the amount of it? What's your error rate? How long does it take to produce this? Or for a resident to go and get the service they need? And to equip everyone with those skills to say, like, what I do makes a difference. And I need to know if what I do changes things by being able to measure that from its current state to its future state.
One follow-up question there. You said measuring both quantitative and qualitatively, and you gave a lot of examples of quantitative data, error rate, time to service.
Yeah.
What is qualitative data in your context, and how do you measure it? And one philosophy, by the way, I have a bit of a bias, is qualitative data, I believe, needs to be converted into quantitative data. Yeah. That's what, all my degrees and stuff say. But what is qualitative data in your context, and how do you make use of it?
Yeah, we wish we were at the stage where we were coding lots of qualitative results and actually pulling things from it. It's not where we are right now. But we encourage folks who are going through our accelerator program to go and hear that actual voice of the customer, or whenever possible to actually capture or record it. And that's led to a lot of really cool change. One of my favorite stories of this, two fun stories. One is when we were trying to do an overhaul of some of our 3-on-1 services. One of our amazing qualitative researchers, who's now at the T in Boston, Anna Chung, she was interviewing someone who's who's an IBM expert. We've got really amazing, talented, smart people in our government. He's like, I don't want to call 3-on-1. I'm an IBM expert. I'm actually good at computers. I cannot find the answer to where to go request a new blue bin, a new recycling bin. And so I'm calling in. And at the time we were trying to reduce call volume because the call times were so long that people getting services, like desperate services, couldn't get on the line. And that qualitative piece was really impactful, like just his actual voice on the line, because when you search for it on our website, we had 31-gallon bins, which is of course not the language that people use.
Normal person uses. Yeah, I would.
It's government language, right? And that was super important to us, but that was a bit of qualitative data that allowed us to unlock a lot of change. And that when people think of service time in Montgomery County, they still say, well, we want more of the blue bin stuff. That's good enough for me. Yeah.
That's a fundamental kind of design principle we think about in software all the time, which is like, it should be, whatever you're designing something, it needs to be accessible, both in a, disability sense, but also just, I use the term stupid simple.
Yeah.
If your grandmother can't use it, then it's probably not useful to a large number of the population, because most people are not running around with PhDs in like psychology or whatever, most people are not, as insanely highly educated as the people who build, software or services, right? Including government leaders.
Yeah.
Okay.
The idea, like it's stupid is, or like it should be common sense, that's a place where we have to like re-question, because especially in Montgomery County, we have such a range of diversity. There is no one common perspective. We all come with our own stories, and we're all going to interpret these things in different ways. And so it's just embedding little things like, hey, let's go make sure we test this with a couple of real users before we bring it live, or let's bring them a prototype, or let's go ask folks. And that doesn't have to be a formal design team. One of the things we try to recognize is like, our frontline employees, you might say that they have been, filling out benefits intake forms for the last 10 years. Or can you help shift that mindset to say, what, they've actually been interviewing users for the last 10 years. And that's a deep source of knowledge that we already have. And so that's one of the reasons why we see these folks where the rubber meets the road as sort of amazing innovation talent.
I like that example, by the way, all the latent information stuck inside people's head.
Yeah.
Cool. So last question that I had was, okay, so innovation is inherently about change.
Yeah.
And change means you're throwing out some of the old stuff and replacing with new stuff. Even if it's good, that results in disruption. So how do you guys strike the balance between innovating and doing new stuff, new processes, new technology, versus, disrupting something that it may not be great, but people are used to it. It kind of sort of works.
There's a Nigel Jacobs, who used to run the mayor's office for New Urban Mechanics in Boston, had a line about sort of like, part of his job was to collect all of the mistakes and failures and use his capital to allow other people to make a lot of mistakes. And I think it's a smart team for innovation. It's a smart role for innovation teams to play, which is when that disruption happens, when it feels ungood, we let folks blame us and we just celebrate the heck out of their successes. But I think that when the change is brought about by the people who do the work in collaboration with the people whom they are serving, that feels so much less disruptive and feels so much like the change that all of us go through, like massive change every day. Like we work with people who have children. I don't have kids yet. That's a huge, crazy change, right? Many people have moved houses or apartments at some point in life. That's a huge, massive change. So when we realize that like we are changing things all the time, it begins to feel less disruptive. And the other thing is it's just like that laddering things up. So sometimes we kind of boil the frog. Maybe I should say that loud. Yeah. Now
perfect. So that was my last prepared question for you. Is there anything kind of you want to talk about that is going on, in your role or in Montgomery County that you're particularly passionate about or want to put in a quick pitch for?
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but I think one thing that we're really passionate about in Montgomery County is making sure that we, especially now, that the person on one side of the form and the person on the other side of the form are both not seeing each other as the data on the form, but are like beginning to see and recognize each other as people. And I think, especially as we bring in more specialization across human-centered design and behavioral science, and like we're learning so much about how to make things better all of the time, that we don't take those tools and those roles and sort of bring them and hold them deeper as experts the way that urban planners did in the past. But we really begin to recognize, for Montgomery County, all 9,000 of our employees as innovators, and then hopefully all 1.2 million of our residents as innovators as well. And so, especially, as you're going and having these fireside chats with those of us who have silly titles like Chief Innovation Officer, the big question to me is, and what I'm hoping for is how we can recognize the Chief Innovation Officer in us all.
Perfect. Thank you again, Michael. For those of us, as a reminder, Michael Baskin is the Chief Innovation Officer for Montgomery County in Maryland, a huge county. Thank you again for joining us, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks so much for having us and building tools for lots of people's ideas to come forth.